Dobro jutro, dober dan, pozdravljeni drugi dan World Hemp Kongresa. Very welcome in second day of the World Hemp Congress Slovenia 216. We have online already Miss Anndrea Hermann from Canada. She will talk about, let's talk about hemp. So I take word to her. Anndrea, are you with us? You can see audience? Can you hear us?
I can hear.
So, place is yours. Very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
And thank to you. I know that it's 3 o'clock early in the morning in Canada, so we wait just a little bit. But anyway, we are very proud that you stay with us and that you teach Slovenian audience and that you teach global audience. And thank you that you are with us, and we are very proud for you. Thank you. Anndrea, place is yours, please.
Yes. Well, thank you, everybody. Once again, my name's Anndrea Hermann, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. I am coming to you from Manitoba, Canada, where the weather's harvest is starting to come around in the fields, and we've got all of our hemp farmers gearing up for their harvest, which will be starting in September and October. So I was asked to give a speech today talking about food quality and the importance of certificate of analysis when it comes to production of hemp foods. Now, these are the same types of parameters that we're going to look at when you're pertaining to any type of ready-made food, really. So next slide, please.
Yes. Hemp review.
All right. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm watching the stream and I'm seeing that there's a delay, so I won't delay anymore. Yeah, so I'm going to go over just a little bit about certifications, food processing flow, and then explaining really what is a certificate of analysis. Next slide, please. So good manufacturing practices, why are these important? Well, principally, we're looking at good manufacturing practices to prevent foodborne illness. Of course, we don't want anybody having cases of E. coli poisoning or salmonella or problems with molds or yeast when it comes to eating hemp foods. And these really come into play when we look at the number of hospitalizations pertaining to foodborne illnesses. And if you look at these, in the U.S. alone, 3,000 people died. That's 1 in 6 affected by food poisoning. And in Canada, it's 1 in 8. I should have looked up to see what it is in Europe. It would be a very interesting statistic to see what the comparison of the EU is also. Next slide, please. So principally, these are driven around HACCP programs, and HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. And essentially what this is a management system put in place to address any food safety issues that can occur. These can be biological issues, these can be physical hazards such as metal or string. In addition, this can be followed all the way through from the material production, so in our case, what's going on in the field, through the procurement and handling, so all of the movement and drying of that grain into the manufacturing facility and then onward into distribution. And it's not just the fact of when it leaves the processing facility, but it's also the fact of what happens when it gets repacked and then consumed. And are also consumers being educated in the proper ways to store these hemp food products? And as we know, if you're buying a small bag of hulled hemp, or hemp seed oil, that's really intended for use within the month. So next slide, please. So part of those HACCP principles, there are 7 principal key factors when you look at the HACCP programs. And these are based on National Advisory Committee around microbiological criteria for foods. And those look at when you're wanting to put together a HACCP program, essentially what you're doing is you're conducting a hazard analysis in which you're identifying any potential hazards that can be occur through the production of the food process. So one of these hazards in particular could be, how about the drying of the grain in the grain bin? Well, what could be a hazard analysis in that point? Maybe the dryer breaks down, so you need to make sure that you're monitoring that. In addition, looking at any critical control points across the process that could potentially cause a problem. This could be looking at if you've got glass in the facility, how to protect yourself against that glass. Glass would break with such things as light covers. So you've got to go through all of the steps of the HACCP program and to really identify where you can have a system breakdown. And in addition to that, keeping all of the records that you would need throughout the entire process so that you can go back to see where you had a failure and successes and being able to come back and prevent those failures from going again. Now, if you happen to have a breakdown in the system, this is when you go in to do a corrective action plan. Go back in to make sure that you're fixing any situation that came along in the program. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I have just a little.
So when we're looking at
second meeting, this slide.
Hello.
Yes, I don't know.
Slide.
Yeah, okay. This right slide. Just control slide because something is here. Yeah, meeting requirement.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're welcome. So when we're looking at developing a HACCP program, these can be substantial programs. And, when we're looking at sourcing from the grain, we're also talking about what's going on in the field all the way through the whole processing. So when we're looking at meeting these requirements, there's a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself. So, understanding our obligations is number one. Our obligation as food processors is to create a safe food at the end of the day that consumers are going to eat and be healthy with. We have to look at all of the regulations and requirements, particularly surrounding industrial hemp. We all know that we have regulations that we're bound by from what we're looking at state regulations or federal regulations within the state. And then how do we interpret these regulations and how do we put these regulations into play in our facility? We have to investigate what's missing. What's missing from our program or what's missing from our flow that we've identified? And then what do we already have? What resources do we already have? And what's our decision timeline? How long do we have to be able to make these corrective actions, or how long do we have to put some sort of program in place? Where are our gaps? There are so many questions before we can even start to look at rolling out the HACCP program. Now, most of the time what you'll see in food processing facilities is that they will be able to start processing the foods prior to actually having their audit and their third party. Here in Canada, we can go up to 6 months prior to having our third party audit to have the HACCP assigned. Part of this is also looking at, things that are out of our control, such as Mother Nature in the field. So let's just say we get a high moisture content late in the harvest or late in the season and we have sprouting in the seed head. That's Mother Nature. We can't control it. And then, of course, at the end of the day, really what we're looking at is you have to just be clean, clean, clean. You can never be too clean in a food processing facility or along the value chain bringing that grain in. And that's also looking at the seed cleaners you're using. And in addition, making sure that everybody understands the hygienic practices that must be put in place. We also have to inspect all of the trucks and the cleaners and the processors that are going to be moving that grain from one place to another, so that inside those trucks we're not having contamination. Next slide, please. So part of those HACCP programs are looking at like the BRC, the British Retail Consortium, in addition to the Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, and then any of the ISO certifications. And these are all recognized programs audited by third parties, and many of our respected industry leaders in the hemp food production are inspected to, if not all three, then at least one of these or other recognized HACCP programs that are audited by third parties. Next slide, please. In addition to the ISO or the BRC or the GFSI certifications, other certifications that we would be looking at are those comparable to the Non-GMO project, instance certified organic, or situations where we're looking at fairDeal or an equal justice program. We'll start talking about domestic fair trade and what does that look like. Of course, when we look at the certified organic, they believe you've got an equivalency program between the USDA, the Canadian, and the European Union. So that means that products grown in any of those can be, of course, certified organic in any of those other countries. Next slide, please. In addition to the organic and the HACCP, we can have additional certifications such as Kosher or Halal, depending on where your marketplace and if your clientele demand that. Of course, these are also third-party certifiers that would come in and certify to these codes of divine law or Jewish law. Next slide, please. So one of the things we've been looking at really in the United States is grass. This is generally recognized as safe underneath the U.S.'s Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. This is essentially an act in which intentionally added foods or additives are subject to pre-market review. So essentially, grass exempts are granted for substances that are generally recognized as safe, essentially. Now, this is a U.S. Federal Drug Administration of the Cosmetics Act. It is not required internationally. But the topic that's summarized is if we want to be in products such as the Kellogg's and Nabisco's or other companies that require grass, how do we get there? This is a big project which includes also clinical trials, human clinical trials, and everything has to be vetted by peer-reviewed scientific reviews. And, right now we've seen that, grass hasn't been a limiting factor in marketing hemp foods in the U.S. So do we need grass? Well, eventually, yes, we'll be in the position and have enough research, peer-reviewed research to back a grass application. Next slide, please. So here we're just looking at a quick, hemp grain production flow chart. This flow chart can vary depending on how your production flow is set up. But essentially, I've set it up all pointing back toward certifications and preparing for the market. Essentially, you're looking at your primary production at the top, and this is all of your hemp grain production, including your on-farm storage, drying, and harvesting, storage, and drying. And then moving on to your primary processing, which is your seed cleaning and any type of carding or any type of cleaning or grading system that may be in place. Moving on then to your secondary processing, which is where you're going to have all of your milling, sifting, sieving, toasting, deculling, or creation of any type of novel product. And all along with this entire process, everything is tying back to the certification and preparation for the marketplace. And then we get on to the certificate of analysis. Throughout all of the steps, you will find that the clean grain or through the seed cleaning system or the primary and secondary processing, everything is being tested along that chain to make sure that there's no breakdowns following that HACCP program. All the way into the packaging material. Now you'll find through the FDA going into the United States, not only do you have to notify about what the product is, but you also have to be able to provide the FDA clearance and registration for all of the packaging material, for instance, and then sending that product on to the final consumer which will also need to educate the final consumer on proper storage so that the product maintains to be fresh as it goes through the system. Next slide, please. So looking back, we've come a long ways in the hemp industry, thankfully, and we know that our industry's grown exponentially, but where did we come from? We're looking at these old historical millstones. We've been milling all types of grains for a long time. Here's some traditional millstones for milling powders and crushing oils. And these particular here are both for oil stones for crushing oil. Well, we've definitely come a long way as we look at the quite state-of-the-art pressing machines that we now have that are monitored. But definitely we could go back to old school milling also. Next slide, please. And here are a few different kinds of millstones. Here are a couple pictures of flour millstones and grain millstones. These come out of Pennsylvania. Some of these are still running in a typical windmill type of millstones. Next slide, please. So now we come to, how do we judge what is a safe food? Well, essentially, we're doing that by analyticals, then looking at the microorganisms, sensory, what levels of tolerance are allowed, the regulations, any type of monographs that may be in place, and industry guidelines. Some of those industry guidelines may be THC testing on derivative products, for instance. Next slide, please. So when we look
sorry,
at
Anndrea, certificate of analysis slide. I just control slide.
Yes, next slide.
Certificate of analysis slide.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry.
You're right on. So looking at a certificate of analysis, this is essentially the document that really is going to be the testing of the critical point of the quality and integrity of the product. And the C of A is the authenticating document that's issued by the appropriate authority. And typically, the company providing the product will have their own lab or a third-party lab conduct the analysis, and then they will detail that on a document that they have created to provide to the client. Next slide, please. So essentially what we're looking at on a C of A, now this could be a very range all the way down to nutritional profiling, but essentially most of the course certificate of analysis details are pertaining to aerobic plate count, total chloroforms, such things as bacteria, the E. coli, salmonella, or staph, the molds and yeast, which can cause a variation of a degree in decomposition of the foods, peroxide values, which show a level of oxidation, for instance, and free fatty acid, which is a key quality and commercial value in hemp, in foods in general, and especially in hemp. And the pictures here that I've got are just a few examples of an aerobic plate count and how we judge how many of those types of particles are indicated, microorganisms are indicated on the slide. Next slide, please. So particularly if we look at the Canadian and US dollar market, every single analysis, certificate of analysis is costing the company a minimum of around $675 or $520 per C of A. This is at the bare minimum. This doesn't include if the C of A needs to have any type of heavy metal testing or pesticide testing. It doesn't include any additional maybe pre-screen testing that may be going on with the grain prior to coming into the final product. So as you can tell, so for every batch, and this is why we're typically looking at batches of the grain coming into the facility at being substantially large so that you can run a larger batch size, take more samples according to your HACCP program, to then produce this certificate of analysis, and they can be quite costly when making small batches and having to run this type of analysis on multiple small batches. One of the priciest things that we see here in our Canadian sector is the cost of the THC derivative testing alone, which can be up to around $210 or more. Next slide, please.
Meeting?
Yep. So it goes all back to meeting the requirements, you know, all the way from looking at what those gaps are, creating a flow chart, creating an action plan, and knowing that these steps can take some time to really put into place, and you have to be open to change. One of the things I've definitely learned from having the opportunity to work in hemp food production and in general in hemp is we have to be open to change and realizing when new policies come in place or when new ideas come in place to help streamline and make the hemp food production safer. And at the end of the day, all we want to do is make safe hemp foods so that we can grow more hemp and sell more hemp. So next slide, please. So I just want to thank everybody for your time and wish everybody a happy harvest in their 2016 year. Next slide, please. And just giving a big thanks to all the farmers, processors, customers, and industry stakeholders for all that you have done to help not only prepare myself so that I could be here today to help show this information, but for inspiring so many people coming into the hemp industry. Next slide, please. And you know where you'll find me, and that will be in a hemp field somewhere close. So thank you all so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Anndrea. You same. We are very proud, and we are many more richer for from your knowledge.